Hello and welcome to our first Shifting Gears with SDV webinar of 2025. My name is Serena and joining us today is Ansgar, Director of SDV Ecosystem Development, and John, Managing Director of Research at Pantera, who will be presenting on the topic of unlocking business value and innovation in software-defined vehicles through open source. If you have any questions as we move through today's presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or use the Ask a Questions tab. Without any further delay, Ansgar, John, over to you.
Thank you so much. So also hello from my side. As you can read from the headline of that webinar, seems like there is a survey which we are going to talk about. And we did that survey together with ClearPath/Pantera. John is going to elaborate on that in a second. Last year already. And there's two parts of the survey already there. A third part is going to be released very soon. The intent of that survey was that obviously we as an open source foundation might be pretty biased about the use and the business value of open source, but we wanted to have a quantitative or qualitative research done in the automotive industry, not only talking about with I'd say friends of open source, but with the industry in general. That was the intent of the report or the research and the survey. Why we wanted to help the stakeholders in automotive in getting an idea, giving their opinion in, maybe also talk about what could be obstacles, and that's all covered in the survey, which John is going to take us through today. With that having said, to you, John.
Thank you, Ansgar. My name is John Garrett. I'm one of the founding partners of ClearPath Strategies. As Ansgar referenced, we have at ClearPath been working in the tech community for over a decade, and then I worked in the tech community prior to ClearPath for another decade. Before that, the work we do is research in support of strategy, thought leadership, reports, and just finding out interesting things that help companies or foundations like Eclipse, get answers to their burning questions. Ansgar mentioned Pantera, so my company ClearPath was acquired by a larger advisory firm, Pantera. The details are not relevant to folks here, but I brought my whole team over, so it's the whole tech team from ClearPath here. So we were the work here, the survey we have here, as Ansgar mentioned on SDVs. We thought this is really cool. It's a cool opportunity. I've worked with Tabang and the Eclipse Foundation before, worked in the open source foundation space for a while, Cloud Foundry Foundation, CNCF, and others. But we thought this was particularly cool. SDV, as most of you all know, Ansgar is the subject matter expert here, and you all will know this, but it was all the talk of CES in terms of the automotive space, and largely as we see the rate of change of technology, this is where the puck is going in the industry. We've used or heard the phrase, and we could debate it on a different podcast or webinar. We've heard and used the phrase "open source is won" before, but that's not evenly true everywhere. It's very true in places maybe like FinServ or retail, but it's a little less true in automotive, where for a number of reasons, be it the regulatory environment or the long time frames, the development time frames of the vehicles, or IP issues, all kinds of issues have prevented its winning, frankly, to the degree as open source has in other industries. But we know that technology adoption and evolution is accelerating. And Eclipse Foundation, when they brought us in on this, we thought, hey, this is really exciting to see open source penetrating newly in a market that it hasn't, which is something that we've seen open source take over so many verticals, and this is another one. So this is cool, and so the research is the piece that we do, like to answer these burning questions, and that's what we're presenting today.
And maybe to comment on that, John, obviously you're right. Automotive is maybe not as easy to adopt open source because stuff like regulations kicks in, topics like functional safety play a role, and the question of how to adopt open source and use it in functional safe context. But nevertheless, I'd argue automotive is still adopting open source for decades already. If
Mhm.
it is, for example, in infotainment domains out of functional safety context, the new thing which is happening the last 3, 4 years is how automotive is also leveraging open source in terms of collaborating in it, upstream
Mhm.
contributing to it instead of just being adopters. And that's, from my point of view, the cool stuff which is going on.
Fantastic. All right. So without further ado, let me jump in on the slides here. Hopefully everybody can see this. I'm presenting on one screen. Normally it's on two, so apologies for the ribbon on top for those of you watching live or recorded. I'm currently in Steamboat Springs, which is in the mountains of Colorado. My family in the other room's waiting to go skiing. So if I talk fast, that's why I'm trying to get up. Just kidding. No, so apologies for the ribbon, but hopefully everybody can see the slides. So what we did, just to level set with the methodology, we asked, as Ansgar said, we didn't just ask our own community. While that is interesting, it's a different survey. The survey we did is we wanted to see from the industry, the broad industry, the automotive industry, and the software industry that supports the automotive industry, what is the current state of adoption, their plans for adoption, and how can we help them overcome the challenges and the barriers that they have, that they face in adopting more open source for software-defined vehicles. And so we went out and we talked to 300 people, half of whom were in the line of business, business decision makers, who engage with software decisions. They're either OEMs or they're working for companies that support the automotive industry with software or that use software to support the automotive industry. And the other half are software engineers. They're software professionals, specifically in automotive. Again, most of these people were at OEMs or service OEMs. And then another comment, we divided them evenly across North America, certain geographies in North America, in APAC, and in Europe, concentrating heavily on the markets where OEMs exist. So we'll take you through some, I think we have about a dozen slides, take you through some interesting findings, things that we found interesting, we and the Eclipse Foundation. Happy to take questions at the end, just plug them in there. Serena's going to compile them and we'll go through anything at the end. And just a quick note for everyone as you go through these slides, lots of data, lots of numbers. All the numbers are percentages, even if it doesn't have the percent symbol. And if they don't add to 100, it's because either it was a multi-response thing or rounding. So if you have questions on that, I'll obviously I'm happy to answer as well. All right, without further ado, let's jump in. So starting off with a section on opportunities for open source in the software defined vehicle market. So like I said, we got about a dozen slides. And the first one, just to start at the beginning, obviously, and Ansgar said this, these folks have been using open source forever. Open source is pervasive in the industry. The decision makers see it being used. The 65% of them, they're using it, already making great use of open source software at their companies. And then, of course, the software professionals, 97% of them are using open source most or all of the time in their roles. And that doesn't surprise anybody or shouldn't surprise anybody on this call. And you can see the qualitative quotes on there, just as another flag. See the quotes on the bottom from people that we asked in one-on-one interviews.
Actually, John, sorry to interrupt. At
Please.
least I don't see, so I'm still looking at the first cover slide.
Oh, see, that's unfortunate. This is the problem when you don't have two screens. What are you looking at? You're looking at oh, you haven't even seen any of the slides that I've gone through. Well, this is a challenge. All right. Fun fact. So I'm here talking about slides that you all can't see. All right, let me see if this goes through this way. It says stop sharing, hide message. This is fun. Why won't that go? Well, thank you for interrupting. Let me see if I can get this to go. Okay, how about now?
Now it works. And we prove by that it's not pre-recorded, so it's live what you're seeing here.
And proof also that I am legitimately not where I normally am. Okay, so with apologies, this is the slide I was walking through in terms of who was interviewed in the survey. I'll leave this up for just a moment, but as you can see on the top, who we talked to and where we talked to them. And then here is me jumping into the data. Ansgar, do we see this?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so we can all see the data I was talking about on the left-hand side. As I mentioned, the numbers, even if it doesn't have a percent symbol, it's a percent. The decision makers, 2/3 of them say that they're using, they're shifting towards use of open source. Or they're using open source. And on the right-hand side, surprising absolutely no one on this call, almost every software professional says they're using most or all of the time open source, and no one says rarely or never. And that's again not surprising to anyone here. It's and the reasons are, as you can see on the bottom, the folks using open source for its innovation and other reasons. Did this jump to the next slide?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, good. Right. So, moreover, so more than just use of open source, they recognize the value of open source, and this is something that's universal across both decision makers and the software professionals. So this is even more interesting than just, oh, okay, I'm using it. No, they actually see it as valuable beyond just experimentation. And as Ansgar said, it's starting to penetrate into more of the core products and some of the core features that these OEMs and the supporting companies are developing. Ansgar, this as I said, this was interesting to me because here you see the decision makers joining in to say yes, we're using this, and then you made a comment early on about how this is increasingly less experimentation, and even though it's been around for a long time, it's more core to some of the things they're developing. Maybe you could elaborate a little more on that.
So from my own experience, it is like I've been working in the industry until the mid of last year before I joined the Eclipse Foundation, and I saw that pretty much in my own experience. So maybe 10 years back, I would have been one of the guys telling you that, oh, nice, open source is free software, excellent, I love it. Not really seeing the on the one hand side cooperation model which lies within open source, and also the opportunity how to build communities, how to foster innovation power of more than maybe the 10 engineers you have on a team, or maybe even the thousands of engineers you have in a whole company. And by engaging more and more in open source activities, I myself learned of these, I call it superpowers of open source communities. And I think the same holds true for the entire industry. So from we adopt open source because either you're working for a supplier and you're simply asked to integrate open source modules because the OEM is asking you to build that into your whatever product. It's more an understanding how open source could be used to reduce your costs, to leverage an ecosystem of experienced folks, how maybe also to make your software engineers happy who love to be in communities, exchange with other experts, etc. And I see that the more I'm discussing with decision makers, that this shift from open source is free software to I can build ecosystems and have a new idea of developing products and structuring supply chains in the automotive industry is becoming more and more popular.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing here is we all know the software developers are into it, but seeing the decision makers coming along in an industry that's been behind is the key shift here, which is also suggests that the trend will only accelerate. Yep. All right, so next slide, which I do believe is up, which is good. Just thought I'd check one more time. Most logical thing for me, you were talking on Scar about software engineers enjoying it for the community and other things. The automotive professionals viewing open source software as like I said, valuable for abstracting non-differentiated components is an easy win to me. Significant benefits from using it in things where the one OEM versus another OEM isn't really differentiating, and using open source to create more of a platform, which is the open source way, right? Create more of a platform on the commoditized or non-differentiated products like safety, diagnostics, generally undifferentiated, freeing them up to focus on features and other things that do differentiate them more. Is this what you're seeing and hearing also, Ansgar?
Absolutely. So from my point of view, it's pretty much a list of things I see the community currently working on. So we see a lot of activities of companies currently in the space of open source, which are also combining the first 2 points, right? So if you would like to use open source software in a functional safe context, obviously everything starting with an operating system. And currently, there is maybe in the market no operating system in open source available for functional safe context. If we are talking about microprocessor architectures, there is RTOSes which are free and safety certified for microcontrollers, but not yet a POSIX operating system. We see a couple of companies being active in that space, working on safety certifying Linux kernels, finding solutions how to put Linux in a safety context, and functional safety, at least also talking about the Eclipse SDV community, is one of the most priority things I'd say the community is currently working on. Talking with also the legislation how norms needs to evolve, talking with auditing authorities, how you can adapt the way you're auditing software and auditing processes of software engineering, maybe to a way how software is engineered nowadays, and maybe not 30 years back when all those standards has been written. And that's definitely, I'd say, yeah, a super important thing the communities, not only ours, but open source communities around the globe are working on.
Great, thank you. So as software, open source software becomes more relevant, or plays more of a role with SDVs, and decision makers and engineers alike are seeing more value from it. This is actually my favorite data point. Like everything now in the broader community, not even automotive, not even SDVs, but the broader community of software, especially from the business decision maker side, is all developer productivity. I mean, even the AI conversation in many ways comes back to productivity, right? It all comes to productivity. So I love this data point here. What we're seeing here is, this is sort of the next logical step from what Ansgar and I were talking about. What it does, what open source allows us to, if we're abstracting that, that layer of undifferentiated space, that commoditized space, you can focus on more strategic initiatives that make sure developers more productive from a business perspective. That developers have more time to focus on these cool features. Companies can start seeing more value from individual developers, and frankly, they can start enabling new business opportunities. Ansgar, what's your take on that?
So from my point of view, productivity goes in different ways. So on the one hand side, productivity is, like you mentioned, you focus the efforts you have as a company in software engineering to those points where it's also worth it in terms of you develop something which is competitive in comparison to your competitors. So you work on innovation instead of the boring software parts, I'd call it. And that's exactly what's also happening in Eclipse SDV. So we have projects where OEMs, suppliers together work on software pieces like in middleware part, which you run on ADAS computers. Since everybody was developing solutions for themselves in the past, they run it in-house, they maintain these solutions, etc. And obviously, it's not giving a competitive edge to them in terms of somebody is buying I don't know, BMW because you have a fantastic middleware inside. No, maybe the people buy a BMW because, I don't know, they like feature X, Y, that, and that more than maybe competitors implementing it. So our members are seeing a value in collaborating on those parts, which is not competitive for them. And use the power of an entire community for that. And then shifting the focus of the own software engineering to what is giving you a competitive edge. That's the one thing of productivity. The other thing is, since tooling and development tools is also an important focus of our working group, imagine you're a software engineer and you do not in the future need to change your entire tool landscape depending on the context you're developing for. So you can pretty much work with the same tooling for different contexts, be it functional safe, not functional safe, be it different domains. And that unification of development tool chains will directly influence the performance or the productivity of a software engineer, obviously, because he doesn't need to switch its tooling context all the time.
I'm just, you had me early on thinking. I was imagining going up to a BMW dealership, asking for a test drive of some sporty looking car, and then while you're on the drive, asking about the middleware. Unlikely scenario. And the final point on this for me, like what you're talking about is one of the reasons why this is such a cool slide for me. I mean, the developer productivity conversation for so long, it was that second one right there. Reduce time to market. We get products out, we ship them so much faster, we can deploy so much faster, we can maintain so much more efficiently. But that isn't what they're focused on. And this is both the software developers saying we get to do the cool fun things, not the boring stuff that you're talking about, and then also the decision makers saying we get to sell better cars, frankly. Yep. So I love this slide. All right, let's go to the next slide. We're also seeing open source, and this is just of the decision makers. So we're just looking at the decision makers here. We're looking at open source enabling flexibility, enabling, I would call it strategic experimentation. So not just generic experimentation, but from a decision maker's perspective, experimentation on, more differentiating level. And experimentation and flexibility, at least to my mind, are not necessarily things that I associate with the automotive industry. And so potentially this has the opportunity to shift some time scales, to shift the rate of development, the pace of development within the automotive industry, which has been a challenge, and partly as either Ansgar or I said at the outset, one of the reasons why this has been more of a been an industry that's slower to take up open source.
Yep.
On the next slide, we also see another benefit of looking at the decision makers. Benefit of open source software. Some basic principles, frankly, of open source software. It does reduce downtime. This is hugely important. This is, you have 2/3 of folks, if you look on the left, saying this is, the second largest driver. Open source is, reducing downtime is the second largest reason to back this. Ansgar, is this, we talked about in the previous couple of slides, we talked about some of the, more strategic differentiators, but also here we're seeing some of the more, as I said, first principles or basic principles of open source software. What is your take on this and weighing the two, perhaps?
So from my point of view, I was really surprised to see that downtime argument of being that strong for the folks. My take on it would be, so on the one hand side, it's downtime, and on the other hand side, then the opposite of it is reliability, right? And what the past situation for car makers was that usually they needed to buy software reliability from their suppliers. So some suppliers put software into products which they sold to the car maker, and then the car maker was responsible, still is obviously, for integrating all these systems to one product, a car. And obviously that has a long way of everybody is reliable of its piece, but then the car maker has the burden of integrating everything into one. And working on a joint collaboratively software stack in a community obviously is able to shift left these efforts of integration, because software could be integrated way earlier than it reaches the OEM. And then the OEM needs to put that into a car and make sure it's working reliable and deal with any findings he is having, talking back to 150 different suppliers, etc. And that means, and that's how I can maybe justify myself why downtime reduction and reliability has become so famous in that survey. That obviously helps if you shift left all these integrations with open source. You do ease that pain on the car manufacturer side for sure.
Great, thank you. And on another fundamental principles we're talking about from again the decision maker side, which to us is the reason why we highlight so many of these decision maker points is because, frankly, in some ways, they're the more interesting ones here. We know how software engineers feel about open source and use open source everywhere else. So this is the breakthrough for me. And here's another thing where it's a little bit basic principles, a little bit old school talking about open source. I mean, Ansgar, I think you used the word free 2 or 3 times, right? Like open source, old school, we'd be thinking about taking on the evil empire of Microsoft and free software, no licensing. But this is another big one for me that jumped out. Naturally we can talk about the debate up front, cost versus TCO when it comes to open source and it comes to support. But I'd be curious, Ansgar, to hear your take on the cost savings and how this in this industry in particular, open source software and support of open source software it has shifted perhaps over time in this industry versus just going with normal commercial products where you have fewer concerns about that.
No, absolutely. So my take is so that example which we all have in mind if we talk about, oh nice, open source is free software, maybe is if you compare, I don't know, I need a software solution for X, Y, that, and either you buy a proprietary product, pay a license fee for that, pay some maintenance per year for it, or there's maybe a free or an open source alternative which you can simply use without paying a license software. So on that example, I still hear a lot of folks talking about that open source software is not free like a beer, but it's free like a puppy. I once heard that comparison in a talk, indicating that you don't get a free beer and drink it and enjoy it and that's it, but it's a puppy. You can maybe get that puppy for free, but you need to feed it, you need to care for it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And that holds true for that software as well, right? So taking open source software, putting it into a car, still needs you to maintain that. You need to make sure that maybe security patches are well integrated into that product. So it's not like you just pick it, put it, and then you're done. From my point of view, cost saving doesn't come from saving license fees. Maybe it could be a thing, but cost savings comes from, as I was talking earlier, if you compare, you develop a middleware stack where you also would like to enable a software ecosystem developing software applications on that middleware. What is the more reasonable way for you to do that? So that the industry built 80 different of those middlewares because everybody is working on its own, maybe coming with its own kind of specification of APIs, own software, own burden of maintenance, etc. Or does it make more sense, suggested question, I know, does it make more sense to develop one which is horizontally integrated, everybody can use, and you just share the effort of building it, maintaining it, supporting it. And that's, from my point of view, where cost saving does make a whole lot of sense instead of just looking at license fee or no license fee.
You had me at free beer, but I think you had my daughter at free puppy.
Yeah, the thing is, with the free puppy, it's free for your daughter because all the duties lies with
right.
you then. I know how it works.
Exactly. Great. So that's the benefit side. Let's look at the other side of the coin for a little bit. This is the last section here on challenges. I mentioned earlier we did this report, this survey, last year. We've got 2 reports already out on the business value of open source in the SDV space and on the benefits. And we'll have links to those at the end of the presentation that you can see. Coming up with a 3rd report soon, which is on challenges. So that's the section here we'll jump into. And here on the left and the right, we've got the decision makers and the software professionals both. And then here we're looking at the technical blockers. Sometimes we like to look at the business blockers, the technical blockers, the skills blockers. These are the technical blockers that decision makers and software professionals flag. And we've already discussed some of the industry challenges, why the industry is maybe lagging a little behind other industries in adoption of open source software. Beyond that, there's some technical challenges, principally integration, scalability, performance is, there's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's on the one hand the greatest point of opportunity, but also the greatest challenges. I don't know, Ansgar, what your take is on that, on complexity and the rate of change and the need for rapid evolution in this space.
Yeah. So my take on it would be all of that. What is here? I would second that. The thing is, the way of how you're tackling that in open source and how you're dealing with it is also not coming for free in terms of we had discussions in the community in the beginning where maybe then OEMs had the impression of like, okay, if my supply chain is proprietary, or if I supply open source software, is no major difference. In the end, I need to have a software which is running my cars and the products in it. But from my point of view, what is important is that even though if an open source software stack means it's maintained and developed with many different parties, everybody needs to have some skin in the game, is what I say. What I mean with that is you need and you want to have an own competence in what that software stack is, because it would be nice if somebody is developing you a software stack and then you can pretty much use it for free, but you don't gain your independence you want to have. You're not self-sufficient, so to say, if you do not have the own skill of dealing with that software. And that's from my point of view the duty which then comes with it. Yes, we can solve parts of these things, as we already talked about. We can ease the integration efforts, etc. So we can deal with these issues, but it doesn't come for free in terms of you need to invest into that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You talk about skin in the game, and you talk about investing in it. Because that slide that we just looked at is the technical challenges. Well, the business challenges, the business blockers, relate exactly to that point. There's the challenges of IP concerns, the challenges of unpredictability of whether the open source project will even be there down the road, what IP or licensing issues you're going to have when you're dealing with this. What happens if it becomes, or it gets acquired, or it's no longer an open source project in the future. And then you can see also some of these, even the decision makers looking back to that rate of innovation, that rate of change, and the dependency management requirements that come with that. Ansgar, I know we talked about this. You talked a little bit about this on the previous slide, but what's your take on predictability, on how you see a little bit of a concern about IP in this space? How do you say that the foundations or others are addressing those challenges for decision makers in the space?
So from my point of view, at least two aspects to it. So on the one hand side, obviously, you talked about that automotive came maybe late to the open source approach. And obviously then you need to also learn, you need to prepare your organization, how you set up, I don't know, how do I deal with IP management? How do I ensure that my software engineers doesn't open source my secret source IP I monetize on? That is something where on the one hand side, open source foundations can help, because on the one hand side, the Eclipse Foundation is helping projects to do an IP due diligence. If you open source something, you get support of educated people on our side, how to figure out if you can do that, how you should do that, etc. On the other hand side, we also support members in building up that own governance in their organization, so how to deal with these kind of processes. But on the other hand side, there is also a difference. So if maybe the enterprise IT world says like they are used to open source for longer, that's maybe true, but also they look into different kind of challenges, right? I remember every time I've been talking to guys from cloud native spaces, enterprise IT spaces in the past, when they talk about a long-term release of something, they maybe talk about 5 years or something. When I explain them then in automotive, if we talk long time and stable releases and how long does the product need to be supported in automotive, we talk 15 to 20 years. So that is also a different thing. And that is then also something which, again, open source communities need to learn and need to find ways of building a governance around that, because that is in fact a need. So nobody would expect, so if you buy a new car and then your car manufacturer tells you as a customer after 5 years that you're out of service and you're not getting any software updates anymore, probably you would not accept that, right? So that is also something where then this is automotive specific, and we need to deal with that. And that's something the community is also working on.
Yeah, I think that that point you make on the long term approach that this industry has to take is critical. You know, things are changing so much faster. They've always been changing, right? Obviously, in the space, you know, change is the one constant in life. Change in taxes, or I guess death and taxes is the same, but change is the other one. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. But in this industry is slow to change for a number of, I think, obvious reasons to everyone who's on this call. Um, you know, and yet that doesn't, you know, the software industry is going to move the way it's going to move, and it's moving faster and faster with the rate of change and the potential ever better. But also on the flip side, then is the risks and security and compliance, by which I mean, I'm thinking about software security and compliance, not just the safety of vehicles. Those have also dramatically change. So even as, you know, I like to talk about, you know, the arc of time and software bends toward easy and bends toward abstraction, security becomes ever more complex, and we broadly are looking for software to solve more of those security risks that arise at the same time. And it's a dance between speed and control. And the security angle, as you were talking about, you know, the long term approach of software or of the automotive industry, Ansgar, how does the software security piece of that enter into the conversation?
So from my point of view, you're right. It's a more and more, the more cars getting connected, the more important gets the topic of security. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not an automotive specific thing from my point of view, right? So if ever you're talking about products which are driven by software, which somehow are accessible through networks, so they are somehow connected, it's getting a more and more important thing. So it holds true for each and any, I'd call it IoT device in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So for us as a foundation, that was a thing which we already identified years back, since we've been also having and still have an active IoT community, for example. And for us, that, for example, led to the fact that we have a department in the meantime in the Eclipse Foundation, which also helps our projects with the topic of cybersecurity. That we offer services to our projects to cybersecurity audit and test the projects, generate findings out of these audits, and then help the projects also to work on the topic of security by that.
What you talked about, the how foundations can help, which is really convenient, almost like we planned this. The next section, the last couple slides, on how Eclipse Foundation and foundations in general can help with this. And you know, this is what foundations are for. They increase confidence in open source projects, for all of the technical support they provide, from the sense of stability they provide. And this is again, I think open source software engineers in general understand this. So this is I have the lens of the decision maker on as I'm thinking about this, and these are the arguments, the reasons for joining these foundations. You know, not only the community and the values which you mentioned earlier, Ansgar, that developers so appreciate, but you know, more tangible criteria, stability, as I said, technical support. Ansgar, talk for a moment, if you could, on not just generally on this, but how Eclipse Foundation and the SDV community broadly are how Eclipse Foundation is supporting the SDV community.
Yep. So as you mentioned, it's not only what we are doing for the SDV community, but this time, obviously, in particular. So on the one hand side, once a colleague told me, if you want to go open source, obviously you can do that by simply turning your GitHub repo into a public repo, and you can claim it's open source. And what value does a foundation bring into that? And the simplest way of answering that is you're decreasing the probability that you're fucking it up by doing it, by infringing IPs, maybe messing up licensings, where projects are getting support from a foundation to do that properly. So we have a whole team of people who are consulting our projects once they want to go open source. Did you check all the patents which you could probably infringe by open sourcing that? which the best license to pick? How do I do that? As mentioned, we also support the member companies by setting up their own governance, how to deal with, how do I separate the IP I don't want to open source with that, how do I enable my developers to develop in open source, etc. Talking about the security audits. From my point of view, the biggest value though in the end is that if you as an individual or you as a company put code into a public GitHub repo, you can claim it's open source, it's accessible. You can also put it to an open source license, so it's also license-wise open source. But the thing still is it's owned by one entity. And if you would generate a community and you would like to invite others to participate, it's worthwhile having something in trusted hands so that you are not the only one who can change the rules of how that is, right? So if you own a private GitHub repo, which is tied to your name, John, you can close it as on that you're waking up in the morning, you decide to close it or you change the license of it. Nobody's holding you from that, right? Mm-hmm. And if you really would like to generate a community, engage with others, work on something together, it's super meaningful to have a trustworthy environment where everybody is equal, where somebody who is independent takes care that everybody is having the same rights and maybe also the same duties. And that's, from my point of view, the ultimate power of a foundation, so that you can build that community with them.
Great. That is the last data slide we have here. But as I mentioned earlier, this survey, we've generated already a couple of reports off of this with a third one to follow. So stay tuned for that. But for those of you who would like to and have not already seen the first two reports, there's QR codes and links right there. There's the link on top there. I'll leave this up. And then Ansgar, if you had anything else you wanted to say in closing, great. Otherwise, I think we can open it up to questions.
Absolutely. Let's see if we have one, Serena.
Yes, we do. All right. So we have one right here. How would you qualify the POSIX layer on top of ThreadX Eclipse SDV project? The question is on screen as well.
Ansgar, that's for you.
Oh, that's not even for me, to be honest. That's way into the weeds. So as far as I know, currently ThreadX is running in the microcontroller context. So I even doubt if there is any feature yet in ThreadX. I know that the program is looking into also developing it there. But then if you ask me how that is technically done, I have no clue about it. But if that is something you would like to discuss, I can put you together with the program manager of our ThreadX community, and he's probably a better person to pick that up. I have no clue.
That's great. Serena, do they have access to the folks watching this have access to our contact information, mine and Ansgar's? I know I don't have it on the screen here, and I'm more than happy to share mine. I assume Ansgar is happy to share his as well if I can speak for him.
Yeah, you can put it in the actual chat. I think that would be a great place to put it.
Great. I will if I might stop sharing again. I'm on one screen here, so this is kind of a little bit of a chaos show on my side. But yeah, let me drop mine in there, which won't be able to answer that question, but Ansgar will certainly be able to answer into
awesome.
that.
All right, we do have another question. Awesome. So we do have another question. Start answering that. So how did you ensure a representative sample in the survey?
So
that's a great question. Ansgar, I'll take this one unless you want it. The nerd answer starts with actually saying you can't actually get a representative sample with an online opt-in panel because it's first of all, we don't know what the relationship is of those people to the universe. And second of all, we don't know what the actual universe of SDV engineers is. So the short answer is you can't. The longer answer is we look at where these folks are and what titles they have, what kinds of projects they should be working on. And so we start off by targeting to make sure we're reaching the right people. Then, because we have been in this industry for a while, we realize that there's a lot of bad actors out there, either because like they just want like the free $5 gift card, or because it's a Chinese bot factory doing the same thing but en masse. It doesn't have to be China. That's where a lot of them come from, and so we have to control for that. And we have to control for a bad sample and fake panelists, frankly. And we do that in a number of ways. One of them is we incorporate. They're kind of cynically, they're traps. It's attention questions. We've had one running for a long time in a lot of our tech surveys, where we ask which of these terms are you familiar with, and it'll be like Kubernetes or something that like a software engineer should be familiar with. Well, like cloud computing. If they don't check that, then clearly they're not the right survey. But then we'll have a fake one or two in there. My favorite fake one is Greenfield as a service. And so we ask that. If you check that, then clearly you're lying or you're not paying attention. So we kick you out. And then we also ask open-ended questions. It's getting increasingly difficult in the world of ChatGPT and other Gen AI chatbots to filter just by making sure people are providing useful responses to the questions. You can still, like, if they're lazy about it, you can see AI pretty easily in a response, or if somebody copy pasted from Wikipedia into an open end, and you can correlate things like how quickly did it take them to type that? What was their typing speed? It's actually a little Orwellian. Like, I know how fast you type your open end responses in surveys. And if it's just like a copy paste thing, then it's like, okay, that person's just like taken from the internet or from ChatGPT or something, as opposed to typing it out. So representative sample, that's the long answer for you. You can't, but you can make sure it's higher quality sample.
Awesome. We actually had in the audience, somebody asked Ansgar to rephrase the question or response for IP concerns. Are you able to touch on that again, Ansgar?
I'm not getting it fully. So what was the answer on IP concerns? The question, sorry.
So someone in the chat had said, this is coming in from Diana. Someone had asked, could someone rephrase Ansgar's response for IP concerns? So if that's maybe the person can that expressed this can add a little bit more clarification in the chat, and we'll circle back on that. Okay. Awesome. Yep. All right. Let's see if there's anybody that says anything there.
Yeah, I think we talked about IP at a couple of different points on SCAR. One was early on, talking about the rate of change in the industry and where IP played a role in that. And then the later was you talking about how foundations can help with that challenge, frankly, how the Eclipse Foundation helps with that. I think those were the two times we talked about IP. If that jogs
maybe we have a response here. It says survey response on IP concerns using open source.
Okay. Yeah, so those are the two times we talked about it.
I think what we talked about is, and just please chime in, John, is that answer was like, what holds you off adopting open source or contributing to open source is IP concerns. And that's obviously a valid point. From my point of view, that is not a point which is automotive specific in the end, because every corporation obviously need to make sure that it's only working on those IP and open source where they also intend to open source the intellectual property, and not deal with some IP which they want to keep for themselves. And that's a fair point. And obviously for an industry, and that is automotive specific maybe, which is maybe not that used to like the enterprise IT industry, which is doing that for maybe 20 years. It's not a supernatural thing, but obviously you can set up your own governance as a company. As mentioned, that is also where the foundation can help you with doing that, and figure out how you want to deal with IP. But the generic concern that somebody, if hearing the word or term open source, is concerned of its IP, that's, I think, a natural thing I hear very often. But it's nothing which couldn't be solved.
Awesome. So just a follow-up question from PG. I'll post it right here. So what is Eclipse doing to ensure the industry partners adopt Eclipse platforms and products? For example, Eclipse Canto, containerization framework?
Interesting question. Interesting that you're particularly looking into that one project. So from my point of view, obviously, what is important, and that's also important to our members, is that we are independent of the projects we are hosting. So we treat every project we are having in the same way. And what we help the projects with is we build the community around it. We do have staff on board, which is running events. Those events, again, obviously features the project. So we, for example, once per quarter have a community day where the developers, the committers, the maintainers of projects come and talk about their projects. And by that, obviously, also reach out to potentially adopters. So we try to build a platform. We try to do marketing for them and with them. But obviously, in the end, we are not influencing the adoption in terms of we pick one project over the other and, I don't know, influence potential adopters on it. But each and every project is getting the same chance of presented. We also support or foster cross-project collaboration. So if we, for example, see that projects are tackling same things, on the one hand side, it's an important thing for us. We are no kings makers. But on the other hand side, we obviously indicate to someone who's maybe new, popping in a new project proposal, obviously we refer them to, hey, there is already projects in the community maybe tackling with that topic you're trying to tackle in your project. Wouldn't there be a meaningful chance to join these efforts instead of reinventing the wheel two times? Hopefully that answered the question.
Great. Let's jump into another question here. So were there any noticeable differences in OSS adoption across regions or market segments?
So there's some. It's a great question. The differences were in terms of adoption were lower. I mean, as you saw those numbers at the front, first couple slides of the survey, adoption's pretty pervasive. Depends on how deeply we mean adoption. Some of the interesting differences between or among the regions, North America, the challenges they were dealing with tended to be more technical. They were dealing with a lot of integration challenges, technical integration challenges. In Europe, the markets we surveyed in Europe, they were dealing with more of the business side of regulatory and security and compliance challenges. That was their primary focus. So as we're thinking about the difference between those two, perhaps North Americans are thinking more technical because either the legal and regulatory space is not as front and center or cumbersome, we might say, or they might be further along. The survey isn't clear on that point, but those are both reasonable inferences. And the APAC region, their challenge was the lack of skills, both software and then expertise in the sense of automotive expertise. And there's a couple of ways to interpret that. You can interpret that as they just have a shortage of these people and they need a ton of them, or they have a shortage of these people because it's so nascent. Either way, again, the survey doesn't quite answer that question, but that is if we think about the things they're focused on, North America focused on integration, Europe focused on regulations and compliance, APAC focused on the skills.
Great. Awesome. So we have another question from Sagar. How Eclipse is making sure Eclipse projects are compatible to each other?
Oh, that's a great question. So as I have already been indicating before, we don't force the projects to do that. We obviously, in terms of what makes sense also for the entire community, we encourage our projects to look into each other and see how they can also integrate with each other. In the end, I'd say the ultimate decision maker in how to make technologies or projects compatible to each other is driven through adoption. So if there is a field where then companies, in our case, the adopters usually are automakers, try and start adopting technologies, that is then creating that gravity where then also other projects are looking like, okay, how can I maybe complement to what is already there? Maybe there's also call for contributions in the community saying like, hey, we need this. Somebody is working on that. Speak up if you would like to. But it's not like, so we are not the architects. So also the Eclipse Foundation does not have development staff. Actually, we are currently looking into a technical program manager who should also help the projects of doing that, giving suggestions where we see connecting spots. But it is not us from the Eclipse Foundation who are developing the technologies, but it's the members who are working on that. And ultimately, if they see a value of joining projects and integrate them with each other, good. We try to indicate where we see opportunities, but we are not the decision makers in that. That's the community who's doing it.
And then we have two final questions. So, what was the biggest surprise from the survey result?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a very good question.
So we talked a lot about innovation and the role of open source as an enabler of innovation. But that wasn't the dominant thing. What they thought was more um, compelling for open source, or what jumped out as more compelling, was its customization. And I think the nuance between those two, you asked for biggest surprise and I answer with nuance. I think the nuance between those two is pretty interesting. That open source enables innovation, but it is not the innovation. The customization that is allowed by open source was super interesting. I think, like, for example, the thing that was least surprising, it was the fact that it's abstracting things like middleware, so I don't have to go on a test drive and ask the BMW dealer about middleware. Okay, that's not surprising. That's enabling the innovation, but it's the innovation so that they could specifically customize things. They've already made that business connection. I think is maybe the most surprising thing.
Great. Thank you. And last but not least, we have just 3 more minutes to wrap this up. So, are there specific OSS projects or initiatives that stand out as particularly impactful in SDV? I think this is more towards Ansgar.
Mm. And it's a very good question. And from my point of view, to give an answer a good consultant would give you is I'd say it depends. It depends on what you're particularly looking at. So I also feel like it's a little bit tough to answer that question from my perspective, since I was already explaining you that my and the Eclipse Foundation perspective is that we are neutral towards our projects. But maybe I can answer that question in a way like, if you look for projects, obviously, what is a healthy project in an open source community? Obviously, it is projects where you see a number of members contributing to it,
Mm-hmm.
working on it. So that is not a single source initiative where one company is working on something which they do in open source instead of doing it proprietary, but nothing else changes so much. And then also how much activity you see in that open source project. And we do have a couple of projects, I'd say. So I would need to talk to our program manager for the current figure, but I say we have around 30 projects in the community currently being worked at. And there's a couple of projects which have been contributed at the very beginning because we also asked, or the community, when we set it up, said like one of the rules to become a part of the community is everybody needs to come with a contribution. And that led to projects which are contributed, which also does meaningful technology things, but didn't find others to really jump into and collaborate on it, which is a fair thing, not judging on it. And you see other projects where you see a lot of engagement, you see a lot of different companies being active in. And then the ultimate measurement of a viable project in open source, obviously, is adoption. And I'd say we do have candidates where we see a good probability that adoption is going to happen, where we also see OEMs who are part of the community committing to adopt something. But obviously, since we are a very young community, we do not have something which you find in series. So if John is getting its new BMW from the dealership, most likely the Eclipse SDV stack is not yet inside, but soon, maybe.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for your excellent presentation, for your time today. The audience too, thank you as well. You're great engaging here with our speakers. We do encourage anybody, if you are interested in presenting further topics for shifting gears with SDV, please, I will link the form in the chat, submit a talk and share your knowledge, your experience with the community. So thank you both very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
thank you,
Serena.
John. I'm super jealous of seeing you jumping to the ceiling slope. No,
I'm
enjoy
right
your
at the
day and
door.
stay safe.
Have
Thanks.
so much fun. Take
Great.
care.
Thank you all.
See
Take
you,
care,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.